Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This webinar is presented to you from the Federation of Asian Canadian Lawyers, FACL. And let me just give you a little bit of a background about who FACL is. FACL Ontario, we promote equity, justice, and opportunity for Asian Canadian legal professionals and the wider community by advocating to the government on policy decisions and legislative issues, fostering community involvement, promoting legal scholarship and education, and raising awareness of equity, diversity, and inclusion issues facing the legal profession and the administration of justice. And if you want to get involved, please check us out at on.facl.ca. So today we're very pleased to present to you some options for Hong Kong residents who would like to come to Canada. It's very exciting times because the Canadian government has finally come out with some special provisions for Hong Kong residents. We're going to go through some of those in the beginning. And afterwards, we're also going to talk about other options as well for people who don't necessarily fit within those special provisions for Hong Kong residents, but there are other avenues. So I'd like to introduce, first of all, my co-panelist, Otto Mangoji. Otto is a specialist in refugee law as well as immigration law. And he and I are lawyers, immigration lawyers in Toronto at the firm of Law Mangoji.
Hello, everybody.
All right, so here's how we're going to work today. Down on the bottom there, you're going to see a Q&A button. And if you like to pose your questions on there during the presentation, we'll be using a PowerPoint presentation and we'll be going through that. But during the presentation, if you have any questions and answers, please put them there and we'll try to answer them during the presentation. And at the end, Otto and I will have we'll talk about some of the questions that you have asked and we'll have a discussion then. All right, let's get started. All right, so we're going to be speaking about the immigration options for various groups. And the first group that I like to speak to are students and professionals. And the reason why I like to speak about this group first is because the provisions that the Canadian government has just come out for Hong Kong residents are really targeted for this group. So one of the special provisions that the Canadian government has announced, now they've announced it, but these provisions are not in place yet. And the government has only announced general details. Some of the specific details have not come out yet. We can put you on our newsletter and we will email you changes once the new details come out. And if you'd like to sign in to our newsletter, please go to our website, lmlawgroup.com, and you can sign on there as well. Okay, but here's what we know so far. First of all, these work permits, open work permits mean you can actually work anywhere in Canada. You don't have to have a job offer first, okay? And so these are very, very precious work permits because that means that you can come to Canada and you can look for a job similar to other Canadians in that you can go to a job interview and they can say, can you work? And you can say, yes, I can. I can start working for you right away. And the employer doesn't have to do anything beforehand. And so these work permits are going to be for 3 years and you can bring your spouse. If you have a high-skilled job offer, your spouse should be able to get an open work permit and your accompanying children would be able to go to public school for free and the family would be able to get healthcare, okay? Now, some of the things that we don't know is what is the age? What does it mean to be a Hong Kong youth? Some of the things that I might guess is right now we have a special program called the IEC program, where with various countries, including Hong Kong, there is a quota, but for people under the age of 30 or 35, depending on which country it is, you can actually get open work permits for 1 year normally. This is a special one for Hong Kong residents for 3 years. So I am guessing, and we'll see if I'm right, that the age might be the age of 30 or 35. People under that age may be deemed to be Hong Kong youth. And who is going to be selected? It doesn't seem like everyone's going to be selected. They do look at whether or not you have obtained a post-secondary degree in Canada, and they said abroad. So what does that mean, abroad? Does it mean that you had received a degree outside of Hong Kong? Possibly. Okay, well, these details hopefully will be announced soon, and we'll let you know. I'm also wondering if there will be a quota. Oftentimes the government imposes a certain amount of work permits that they will issue for a certain group of people. So that's another question as well. Launch date. When is it going to start? The government said soon. Soon in government terms does not necessarily mean soon in normal terms. But hopefully in the next few months, possibly we might see this starting. Now, the government has also announced some other pathways for permanent residents, especially for Hong Kong residents. So, first of all, they have said that those people who have worked in Canada for a year could qualify. Okay, now let's go back to that work permit. This is a pathway that the government has given, especially for Hong Kong youths and residents. You work in Canada for 1 year, and then you can get, you can go through this permanent residence application. Now, there will be some minimum language results, possibly. I'm guessing the IELTS, possibly 6.0. That's normally a benchmark for a lot of permanent residence applications. This is, again, just my guess, not necessarily what it's going to be, but it could be something like that. Education, they may require a post-secondary education as well. And what kind of work? My guess is that they could require high-skilled work. In Canada, the government has always placed a huge emphasis on people who have high-skilled work experience versus low-skilled work experience. What's high-skilled and what's low-skilled? That's a big question that the government has classified all of the different occupations, or they've tried to, under the NOC codes, the NOC codes. And O, A, and B are high skilled, and C and D are low skilled. Now, does this mean that self-employment work could qualify? Possibly not. The government has always de-emphasized self-employment work, and I suspect that they are not going to allow this, but then that's, again, only my guess. Okay. The second pathway that they have also announced are for people who have studied in Canada in a post-secondary institution. Okay, and so some of the questions I have for this is, does it have to be a public college or university? Most of the time, all of the benefits that a person can incur with studying in Canada is from studying in a public college or university, such as the post-graduation work permit. So that could be a factor. And also, we don't know exactly how many years are going to be for this program. So a lot of questions we have right now and I'm sorry, I don't have the answers. I can only have conjectures, but hopefully this will be announced soon, and we'll be able to get some real concrete answers soon. Now, let me talk about what happens if these provisions don't necessarily apply to you. What if you're not under the age of 30 or 35 or whatever they're going to say is youth, right? What if you don't want to study in Canada? I'm going to then talk about the express entry system, which is in place right now for everyone. Okay. And I'm going to talk about this, and then we're going to talk about some other options as well. The express entry system is the most famous Canadian immigration system, and it's a points based system. So here's how it goes. First of all, you have to create an online profile. You qualify for the online profile under three different categories: the federal skilled worker class, Canadian experience class, and the federal skilled trades class. And once you qualify, you can enter the express entry pool and you can be there for 1 year. But just because you've entered the pool, it doesn't mean that you've actually applied. You're just in the pool and you will get a series of points based on your background called the CRS points. Okay. And it's based on your background and if you have provincial nominee program nomination, but it's only with express entry based PNPs. Okay. Now, you can stay in the pool for 1 year. Every 2 weeks, the government is going to have a draw where they announce a number. Recently, the numbers have hovered around the 470s. Okay. So let's say they have a draw for 471. If your number is above that number, then you can get the invitation to apply, and that's when you can actually get out of the pool and apply. If not, you stay in the pool for a year and then your profile will expire. Okay, so it's not necessarily just getting into the pool that matters. It really matters if your score is above the score where you can get out. Let's first talk about how you can get into the pool. So the one that most people are going to qualify for is the federal skilled worker class. And under this class, you don't have to come into the country. You just have to have 1 year of high skilled work experience in one occupation that's full-time and continuous. You have to pass some language exams, the IELTS of 6.0 in each category. I don't care about the general score. The 6.0 in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Let me just have a caveat here. The language results that you need to get into the pool is nothing compared to the language results that you need to get out. Okay, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But then you have to have some financial savings. Around 13,000 Canadian is what one person normally requires. If you're adding some family members, then you're adding a few thousand for each family member. And then they do a scoring based on your background. And you have to meet a minimum federal skilled worker score of 67 points. Okay. The second one is the Canadian experience class. Now, this is for people who have 1 year of work experience in Canada, which is high skilled. And you're employed. So remember when we were talking about the new program for the Hong Kong residents that the government had announced, where they said people who have 1 year of work experience in Canada? I suspect that the work experience criteria is going to be very similar to the Canadian experience class work experience. High skilled and employed. This is what I suspect. Okay, we'll see if I'm right. There are also some language requirements similar to the federal skilled worker class, but in order to really qualify to get out of the pool, the language results normally have to be much higher than that. There's also skilled trades. Skilled trades is something where you need to have a LMIA, which is something where the employer in Canada has to show they can't find a Canadian to do the job. Okay, and the trades are mostly in the construction trades and cooks and chefs as well. And also or you can have a provincial certification in the trade as well. Okay, and then you have to have work experience and language points. So these are the three different categories to get into the pool. Now, let's say you're in the pool. Okay, so I have 4 people here. Now, let's say that the straw was 471. Okay, who's getting out? Well, you're looking at way. Now, sometimes the government not only announces a score, they also announce the category in which the draw would be. So for some time during COVID, between March and June of this year, there were draws only for people who had Canadian, who qualified under the Canadian Experience class or who had provincial nomination. And so as a result, especially for the scores for the Canadian Experience class it was dropping up to the, I think, 431 at one point. But once they opened it up to everyone else in the pool, it's climbed back up to around the 470s. So people often ask me, Elizabeth, do you think the scores are going to drop or not drop? I say, first of all, nobody can really, I don't know, right? With regard to express entry, when they only invited people for Canadian Experience class, it did drop. But normally speaking, the scores, I think, have stayed around the 470s because of the fact that we do right now have many, many people who want to come to Canada. We are one of the most sought after countries to come to Canada. And as a result, the Canadian government normally chooses the top 3,000 to 4,000 people in the pool. And because it's so competitive right now, the scores have stayed around that level for almost 2 years right now. Okay, so let's talk about how do you get the score, the CRS score. First of all, age. Age is a huge factor. I like to say once you reach your 30s, every birthday that you have is no longer happy, okay? Because every time in your 30s, you're going to drop by 5 or 6 points. In your 40s, it's a big, big drop, 10, 11 points. And by the time you're 45, the good news is it doesn't drop anymore. But the bad news is it's a big fat zero for your age compared to people in their 20s who have 110 or 100 points. And that's a huge disadvantage for people who are older. Education, in order to get through the system without first having Canadian work experience, we're right now to get to the 470s, you're really looking at 2 degrees at the minimum. 1 degree that is at least 3 years in length for the program, and another degree that is, another post-secondary degree. Okay. Language is a very, very, very big factor. In order to get through the system, you're looking at least at IELTS levels of 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, and 8 in listening. Normally, we would want to have a little bit even higher than that. But if you get to that level, the points do jump by a lot. And then maybe if you have 1 or 2 have maybe a 0.5 more, then you may have enough points with the 2 degrees and with you being young. Okay. If you have Canadian work experience, and this is the Canadian work experience that you gain when you're not a full-time student, okay, when you're employed and it's high skilled, this same as the Canadian experience class work experience, that will also give you a huge boost for the most part. Foreign work experience, you can get up to 50 points if you have high language points and you have at least 3 years of high skilled work experience outside of Canada. Spouse, if your spouse has high education language points and they if they have some Canadian work experience, they can add a little bit to your application. Provincial nominee programs. So this is where different provinces have different programs that are express entry linked. Some provinces, like Ontario, will just comb through whoever is in the pool. So you have to be in the pool for them to look through, and they will select people that they like. Now, who do they like? That's a big question. Some of the people that they have liked, who they have then invited to apply with them, are people who are in the tech industry and who have pretty high points, not high enough to get drawn, but almost there. They have invited people who speak French. Sometimes they invited people who have job offers. You know, that's that's one of the programs. Other provinces like Alberta, they have also done that as well, and they have their own criteria. There are other provinces like Saskatchewan where you first have to be in the pool as well, but you can also apply to them and see if you can get drawn from them, and then you will get 600 points. And any time that you have an express entry linked provincial nomination, you will get 600 points added on top. If you've previously studied in Canada, you will get some points. Arranged employment, and we're going to talk in detail about arranged employment. Arranged employment is not given if you only have an open work permit, okay? You can only get arranged employment if you have a LMIA or if you have an employer-specific work permit. On the work permit, you can only work for one employer, okay? And if you don't have an LMIA, but you have an employer-specific work permit, you have to work in that position for at least 1 year for that employer. And then you can work for, if as long as you have a job offer of at least 2 years or so, or permanent job, then you can get either 50 points for regular workers or 200 points if you're an executive manager. And this is where we're going to talk about some more when we talk about entrepreneurs, okay? If you have siblings, you can get a few more points. If you can speak fluent French, that will add a whole lot of points for you. Trade certification, that's more for the trades, the construction trades, okay, and cooks and chefs, okay? So these are the points to get into the express entry system. Right now, as I've said, express entry is highly competitive. So it's not just about seeing if you can get into the pool. If you don't have the points to get out of the pool, you really should look at some other options as well. All right. Let's talk about entrepreneurs and businesses. One of the things that I like to talk about a lot is the startup visa. So this is a permanent residence application that is not express entry, okay? It does not calculate points. It looks at instead whether or not you and up to 5 founders, okay, in total. So you and up to 4 other, you could just be yourself, can start a business in Canada, okay? And there are specific things that you have to have. So first of all of you guys together should have majority ownership of the company, and and you all should have active management. It's not a passive investment situation. All of you have to show that you will be able to actively manage the business, okay? The main thing is that you have to have support by one of the designated organizations. You have to be accepted, and the designated organizations are organizations that are on a list that have been selected by the Canadian government, okay? And so it could be an incubator where they accept you into your company into their incubation program, or your company would have attracted $75,000 in investment by a designated angel investor in a designated angel investor group, or $200,000 by a venture capital group. And you have to pass IELTS as well, which is much lower level than the express entry. It's around the fives level in foreign reading. Okay. And this is essentially it. There's no points looking at your age. They don't look at your education. This is essentially what it is. The main issue, as you probably can guess, is getting the support by one of the designated organizations. And it will take some capital because, for example, the angel investor groups, they wouldn't necessarily want to invest in your company if you have zero amount of money in your bank account, right? They want to make sure it's a safe investment. They also want to see that most of these groups will want to see that you have an innovative company and that you will be able to be successful in Canada. But this is something that we have worked on with quite a few companies, very, very good companies that will be of great benefit to Canada. And the nice thing about this is that it's a straight permanent residence application. In the meantime, if you do want to come to Canada and work on your business, you can also get a work permit while waiting for your permanent residence, which would take around a year. Normally, it was a year before COVID. Now we're probably adding a lot, maybe 6 to 12 months on top. Okay. But it is something where you can get a work permit. In the meantime, your spouse can get an open work permit. Your children can go to school in a public school in Canada up to the grade 12. And, it's something that is quite attractive to a lot of good entrepreneurs. The second category that I'd like to speak to is the intercompany transferee category. The intercompany transferee category is something where I use with businesses that are going to want to open up a related company in Canada. Either a subsidiary or sister companies that are owned by another parent company, or the Canadian can be the parent to own the overseas company, but whatever it is, they have to be related, majority owned. And what happens then is we can transfer employees of your overseas companies to Canada. Okay, the employees have to have been employed with the company for at least 1 year. And we can transfer two kinds of employees. One is senior and executive managers. The second one are people who are specialized knowledge workers. Remember, okay, this is a work permit, first of all, okay? But people who are transferred under this work permit, if you work for 1 year and you have a permanent job offer, or at least a job offer of 2 years, you will get arranged employment points for express entry, okay? So for executive managers, especially the CEOs, the general managers, the VPs, etc., you can get 200 points, okay? Other workers can get 50 points. Total length of time of work permits issued under this category for the senior managers and executive managers would be 7 years. The specialized knowledge workers are 5 years. Now, oftentimes, the first work permit for a company that's just started in Canada, they might issue it only for 1 year. Sometimes they do it for 3 years, but often they do it for 1 year, and they want to see whether or not your business is actually going to be doing business in Canada. Okay, but in order to do this, people would say, oh, how much do I have to invest in this? There is no minimum amount. It's just whatever will work for your company to do business in Canada. So this is a nice way to, have yourself, if you, opened your own company, or you can also transfer other employees as well by putting in a subsidiary or related company in Canada. Finally, I'd also like to speak to the owner-operator LMIAs. So what LMIAs are, it's labor market impact assessment. And what they are is we have to first for most work permits, okay, we have to first apply to the Labor Department in order to get an opinion from them that the worker will bring labor market benefits to Canada. And normally what happens is the company has to advertise and show they can't find a Canadian to do the job. Okay. The owner operator, if you own and operate your own company, you don't have to do that. You don't have to recruit Canadians for the job. But instead, there are some other things. First of all, you have to at least own 51% of the company personally. Under intercompany, it's the company, overseas company, that owns the company in Canada. Under this one, you have to own it personally. You will demonstrate that by you working in Canada, it's going to create jobs for Canadians. Okay, so it's all about job creation, not just about taking whether or not you take away a job. It's about creating more jobs for Canadians. You have to show that you're going to be your company will be able to pay for the salaries and the operations of the company. And one of the things that recently the government has really been very hard on is whether or not the company is actively engaged. You can't just have an idea out there. You actually have to have the company run for a little bit of time. Maybe you buy over a company that has already been run, or you are going to, you yourself somehow had started running it for a little while before you can do that. Okay. Now, the nice thing about the LMIA is as soon as you get this, with the intercompany, you have to work for 1 year before you can get the arranged employment points, the 200 points. As soon as you get this, you will get arranged employment. But you also have to be quite careful. Right now, the government is not necessarily saying that all owners and operators are going to get 200 points. Depending on your company, the government is saying that sometimes, for example, if you're going to buy a restaurant, they might say you're not a CEO, you're just a restaurant owner, restaurant manager, and therefore you get 50 points only for the LMIA. All right, so that's all I have today on the economic part. Now I'm going to turn over to Otto to talk about refugee claims.
Hello, everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about refugee claims, and this is more of a unique area that we don't often talk about with Hong Kong residents. But what has happened is recently, many of you may have heard in the news, is that there has recently, out of the Refugee Protection Division, been a positive refugee claim decision. And this was for an individual that has won on the grounds of political opinion or being an activist in Hong Kong right now. So when this has happened, we have gotten a lot of interest in it from individuals, especially youth who were part of the Hong Kong protests, who now that there has been a crackdown, really do fear for their own lives, fear going to jails, and fear the Hong Kong and the Chinese government. So is this an option? And there's many things that we're kind of looking at. Right now, we only, the case hasn't actually been released, so we don't actually know all of the details of it except from what has been put into the news media. But from what we know is that the individual was a owner of a factory, and they were developing at the factory protective gears for many of the individuals that were activists during the protests. So essentially, what we're looking for in these refugee claims, we have heard that there are many that are following up, that there are many individuals that have already made claims, and so we're going to be seeing more and more decisions coming out of it. Right now, we're waiting to see. We're in a wait and see section, and the first thing that we're kind of looking at is how the government's going to be dealing with the issue of exclusion. So basically, this is the question of whether individuals will even be allowed to make a refugee claim. And essentially, to simplify it, the law is that if an individual has committed what's considered a serious crime overseas, and it is also a serious crime here in Canada, then they can be excluded from making a refugee claim altogether. Okay. So this question was put to the minister, and the minister did say that anyone who is charged under the new national security laws in Hong Kong will not be excluded. This was an interesting comment, mostly because it's not actually up to the minister to make that determination, especially the Minister of Immigration. So we don't know if that will hold. However, um, even if this does hold, there's still other laws that people have been charged with overseas. For example, many of the student protesters were charged with inciting violence, which is also a crime here in Canada, which could be considered serious criminality. So will they even be allowed to do it? And how is the government going to start dealing with exclusion is something that we are looking at very carefully right now in the decisions that will be coming out. Then the next issue that we're going to look at is really the issue of enumerated grounds. Most of these claims are going to be made on political opinion or activists who have a political opinion. And the question on political opinion claims often becomes, how active do you have to be? If you just showed up in the streets, does that make you active enough? Do you have to be charged, or does the government have to have come visited your home? All of these issues are still kind of up into the air. And what we often find on political opinion claims is that there's a gray area, is that just having the opinion doesn't really get you over the threshold, but that there is a certain level of activity that's required. And this is going to start fleshing out in the jurisprudence as more of these claims come through. The first one, as we know, the individual seems to have been very active. They essentially owned a factory. They were providing protective gear. From what we understand, the Chinese government or the Hong Kong government was actually coming to their door. They actually had somebody following them. So the level of risk was quite high. The third issue that's really going to be interesting in these claims is what we call state protection. State protection is the idea of whether you can actually go to the state to receive protection from the risk that you're facing. And in this instance, what has happened is that it is the state that is the agent of persecution. And why we have a first decision and why that makes it so interesting is, for the first time, the Hong Kong government has been perceived by the IRB to not be able to protect or to be the agent of persecution themselves. And having one decision that says that and gives up the idea of state protection is very important, because that can then be used in other decisions continuously to override the idea that the Hong Kong judiciary or police can protect. And so that is a really important context from having one decision. However, there are consequences to making a refugee claim. And essentially, our usual advice to an individual is, what we do in our consults is we go first through all of the other options that Elizabeth had gone through before we would go to a refugee claim. We call it the application of last resort. The way that I describe it to clients is, in a refugee claim, it's like playing poker, and essentially at the point of making a refugee claim, you're going all in. Is that there are a lot of other options are closed for you once you make the refugee claim. And the reason this is because the moment you make a refugee claim, essentially you are given a removal order at the same time. So they're already looking at how to remove you when you make a refugee claim. That removal order is put on hold while you go through the refugee claim process. However, it does put limits on other immigration applications once that removal order is in place. Some of the most basic examples is, for example, if you make a refugee claim and you get a work permit based on that refugee claim, and you're working in a high-skilled profession, you can't count that work for Canadian work experience points in the express entry system that Elizabeth talked about. So it does really shut out other areas for you. The other issue that we have specifically with Hong Kong is this fear that even if people do make refugee claims, and that if you continue, which is often something that board members look at, is whether you've continued to your political activism here in Canada, if you are going to Hong Kong political protests, if you are online protesting, that China does often collect information on protesters, and they do have people on the ground that are looking at what's happening. So it can be a consequence if you do lose the refugee claim and have to go back to future security. The other one, and this is something that most people don't know, is that you're never really able to return or get a passport. And this is because of the law of cessation. Essentially, once you get refugee status from another or against another country, if you go back, you're essentially stating that you are now safe there and that you do feel safe there. And if you come back to Canada, even on a Canadian travel document, then essentially it is open for the government to start cessation proceedings against you. And if you are found to be cessated, it not only gets rid of your protected person status, but you also lose your permanent resident status. Another thing that people don't often understand is it's not only going back, it's any consular services. So even getting a passport from one of these organizations or from the government after you make a refugee claim can be very dangerous and can open you up to cessation proceedings. So because of these consequences, and because these consequences are so serious, and because we don't yet have enough jurisprudence to be able to tell people that these are great claims, we again look at all the other economic applications before making a refugee claim. But we have added it to this presentation because for the first time, it may actually be an option. And I think it's going to be a best option, especially for younger activists or individuals that have been arrested or put in detention or have been charged with some of the new national security laws. And those are kind of the facts that we'll be looking for when assessing for a refugee claim.
All right. We have our information here if you wanted to contact us for more information. And if you have attended the webinar, please do let us know, and so that we can give you a discount. If you're coming from FACL and if you've attended the webinar, then we give you a discounted discount for the consultations. Let's go through some of the questions that we have, and if you have more questions, please put them on the Q&A. So one person has asked if he was applying for permanent residence through the new policy, is his application based on the CRS? And the answer is no. So the policies that the Canadian government have announced, especially for Hong Kong residents, the one where you have 1 year of work experience, or you have the previously studied in Canada, are supposed to be outside of the express entry system, which is why it's really attractive. Okay, so this is there are certain criteria that's based on it. One of them being that you're a Hong Kong resident, but this is special for you guys that the rest of the world don't have. We have another question as well on the chat box. It says, Express Entry CRS owners, operators for LMIA, are they only for Hong Kong people, or are there general pathways for other countries? Am I correct in saying that only special scheme for Hong Kong people is open work permit for Hong Kong youth? There are 3 programs that the government has announced. It's the open work permit for Hong Kong youth, and then the 2 permanent resident pathways. the one where you have worked in Canada for a year, and the other where you have studied in Canada. What are the details for that? We don't know. The other ones I have been speaking to are general for people from around the world, and they're not Hong Kong specific. But sometimes, the reason why we've been speaking about that is because maybe you don't fit. For those who don't fit into the special programs, there are other options as well. Okay, and I think those are all the questions we have today. Thank you all so much for joining us. And if you're a lawyer and you're interested in joining FACL, please let us know and come on to the website, and we'll be happy to work with you and welcome you to our organization. But thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful day, and maybe we'll see you in Canada soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.